And if it's okay, I would like to start with Rabbi Professor Jeffrey Wolf, who the second that we started speaking about this idea, started discussing this idea with Rabbi Adler, and it was like it's a no-brainer. It's like you have to speak to Professor Wolf. And the second that I reached out to such a reception to it, so I thank you so much. And most of you already know Rabbi Wolf is an internationally known scholar, lecturer, and public figure, and is an associate professor in the Talmud department at Bar-Ilan University, specializing in history of Halacha, medieval and Renaissance and Jewish history, and philosophy of the Rav, and the interaction between Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Received his PhD in medieval Jewish history at Harvard University, and spent 2 years at Yale University as a postdoctoral fellow. Let me feel cool. This is very cool for me to see this. But the most important thing for tonight is that Rabbi Wolf, I don't know if I got this right, studied just maybe 10 years with the Rav, and has written extensively. And for us, it's a tremendous source to hear from Professor Jeffrey Wolf.
I feel a little funny because I'm the first person to acknowledge the fact that Rabbi Schrader and Rabbi Berzon are far bigger Talmidei Chachamim than I am, and I feel funny one person. I don't think it was and Elon has such a unique take on the Rav from his specific viewpoint. It's hard to lead off. I had this course of studying with the Rav for 9.5 years, but not by going through the usual cursus honorarium, as they say in Rome, the usual line of study. As a native Bostonian, the Rav was much more accessible, but I didn't grow up in the Maimonides community. I had the unique source as an opportunity for me to publicly meet somebody that what year was it? I was studying at the Boston Hebrew Teachers College, and I was in the class of Rabbi David Shapiro. And at one point, I asked him what the place to go learn would be for the summer, and he said, "What do you have to go to? Just go to the Rav." And he, and together with he and Rabbi Walton was Yeshaya Walton was Yahrzeit of the Bracha, made it possible, and that was one of the most transformative moments in my life. The first day I walked this year, and I have it. I debt to Rabbi Shapiro for that, for both of those things, the advice and also facilitating, that I can never repay. Because my connection with the Rav was for 6 years in Boston until I went to yeshiva in 1978. My relationship with him was a lot less fraught, I think. Well, Boston boys always been treated, but was less fraught and more intimate, and I had the opportunity to also be a road driver for a while. My first encounter with his philosophy, my major encounter with his philosophy, happened at the same time as I began to undertake my doctoral studies with the Rav's son-in-law, Professor Tversky, so that to a certain degree, my understanding of what the Rav was trying to do philosophically, loved as it was straight person, but philosophically was very much cast through the prism of Professor Tversky's demand that hashkafa, Jewish philosophy, be viewed under what's called the long view rate. That's the reason why I'm giving you this whole chagati. There is not a day in my life, either emotionally, religiously, or spiritually, or halakhically, learning-wise, that I don't invoke or don't think of something I've been taught from the Rav. But I would like to emphasize something which I've come to understand over the past 15 years more than any other. And that is that the Rav was in many ways prescient, almost prophetic. He would, the last thing he would amount to would say was to be a Shirah. But he was prescient, if not prophetic, in terms of what Judaism was going to require in the second half or the last quarter of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. People often make the mistake of associating the Rav with his first major essay, Halachic Man, and identifying him with the very mathematical, almost detached, cold, litvak kind of personality which can emerge from a reading of that essay. That was not the Rav. If you take a look at the mass amount of published, and now more things are published, and more importantly, recorded lectures and talks that he issued, there were two things that he tried to inculcate in his audience all the way back from the 40s until he retired. Number one is the absolute need for the development of an individual, emotional, experiential relationship with God. It's almost as if he realized that what he wrote in Halachic Man about the halachas as a mathematician, the halachas as a very logical and detached individual, required a corrective. Required a corrective because people can get detached and over-intellectualized, and over-intellectualization leads to arrogance, and over-intellectualization leads to judging Torah and Chalila judging God. So the major tropes of all of his teaching subsequently was to balance that, was to correct that, to first of all cultivate in every single individual an awareness, an imminent awareness of God as the context within which a Jew lives. That's my take. Is the reason why we call God Hamakom is because he is the context. He is the context in which we live. We should be enveloped with his awareness passively as we go through our lives, actively as we study or pray. That in turn vivifies the act of study as an encounter with God. It's not just, in other words, I personally can't stand it when people say, when I go to yeshiva or I go to midrashah, whatever it is, they study text. No. I happen to be a tremendous fan of Dante Alighieri. I have a bust of Dante on my desk. I have 3 versions of Dante over my desk. Studying the Divine Comedy is a text. Torah is not a text. So that's number one. And the truth of the matter is that the Rav's concern for the infusion of the religious gesture and the gesture of the Torah was borne out by the tremendous thirst for an emotional and intimate relationship with God while not abdicating one's mind at the same time, which proved to take over orthodoxy over the course of the 90s and this part of the 20th century. That's number one. Number two, related to that is the need for intellectual humility. There's a famous polemical speech that the Rav gave in 1975 in which he demanded that Jews should accept the Torah a priori and work within it to understand it, and not judge the Torah, not judge God. And he invades against those who would render the Torah into some kind of academic fossil, which has to be reduced or should be reduced only to its to the circumstances of its creation, by the Gemara, the Mishnah, whatever, from the Torah itself, because this is the living word of God, and he harped on this. In fact, recently there's a wonderful Dr. Arnold Listiger, who really dedicated his life to spreading the Rav's writing, has been digitizing and publishing short clips of the Rav's of drushes of the Rav's in Yiddish that weren't listed anywhere. One of them recently, about a year ago, that was issued was a direct attack on, or a criticism of substituting purely academic Jewish studies for Torah. Now they can enhance, you can enhance your Torah with historical knowledge. That's what First Church spent this time doing. And even, and never mind the Rav's son, Professor Chaim Soloveitchik. But it remains Torah. In our community, that's a challenge today, the last 10 years. If you listen to the kinds of debates that go on within the Dati Leumi community, many of the self-appointed and so-called people who are more progressive will always revert and turn the Torah into a text rather than leaving the Torah. So the Rav was ahead of his time on that as well. And just one last thing. I mean, there's just so many things you can say. A Talmud, I'm 60 years old. I'm older than Rabbi Shlomo. But we know each other 50 years. Rabbi Brisson and I met at the bus at the Rebbe's basement when the growth of Kedusha summer. One of my personal, just on a personal note, the Rav was the person who literally made it possible for me to be a Frum Jew. By virtue of his personal example, by virtue of encouragement that he gave me in terms of pursuing both simultaneously a rabbinic career and an academic career. But it's more than that, is the sense of being in the presence of giving the privilege of being in the presence of a person who just towered over all of us, but who inspired a profound sense of Yiras Shamayim when you spoke to him, and even expressing when he spoke, but he taught, is something which follows me every minute of every day, and even in those areas where maybe I don't exactly do what he might have done today. Nevertheless, the capacity of a Rebbe to instill his presence on a Talmud, or the ability, the success of a Rebbe to instill himself on a Talmud, is the sign of his success. Ironically, the Rav thought that he wasn't much of a success. So I can tell him, Rebbe, with me, you were a success. And one way that he accompanies me is something that I actually learned from Talmud of his brother. My dear martyred friend, Dr. David Applebaum, Hashem Yikam Damon, was a Talmud Muvhak, a Ben Bayit, I don't know, almost an alter ego to regard Soloveitchik. When Ravine was nifter, a couple of years before David was murdered, I called him up to wish, express my condolences. And he said, Ravine didn't die. I'm learning neither with him. Because it was all recorded, always able to go back and to have that connection in his imagination and his memory. We all have that possibility because of all the writings and so on. And now clear tapes for change. And I encourage everyone to join the ranks of the Reb's Talmidim, or to be of this Talmidim's Talmidim, because there are people who set the agenda for Jewish intellectual and halachic history for centuries after they died. Jewish philosophy is still writing footnotes to the Rambam. And in our community, we are still writing footnotes to the Thank you.